Jayden Carter never expected to survive the fall off Eagle Summit, especially not after his classmates pushed his wheelchair over the edge. In Ridgefall, Arizona, the Harrington family owned the town, the police, and the truth. But when Jayden uncovered the secret behind his father's murder, he became a problem they needed to erase. And the moment he hit that cliff, the war for Ridgefall truly began. Jayden Carter never imagined that his life would narrow down to a single terrible moment on the edge of Eagle Summit, yet everything that led him there had been building for years, long before the day his wheelchair left solid ground. At 16, he carried more weight than any teenager should: the loss of his father, the reality of his disability, and the daily cruelty of Ridgefall High, a place where privilege walked the halls wearing varsity jackets and the Harrington name meant immunity. Jayden had grown used to being the target. He had grown used to the whispers, the elbows accidentally knocking into his wheels, the cafeteria food dumped onto his lap for laughs. He had learned the rhythm of a town where everyone knew the rules but no one dared speak them, and where his mother worked 2 jobs and still struggled to pay the medical bills that piled up like unwanted reminders of everything their family had endured. But even in Ridgefall there were lines Jayden thought no one would cross. He was wrong. The morning it happened had begun like any other, Jayden navigating the cracked sidewalks towards school, the Arizona sun already beating down on the asphalt, his backpack hanging from the back of his chair. He kept his head high, even though every turn toward the parking lot made his stomach tighten. Cole Harrington and Brett Maddox always arrived early. They liked an audience when they caused trouble, and Ridgefall High was their stage. Cole, with the smirk of someone who thought the world existed for him to rearrange, walked the halls like an heir surveying property. Brett, always half a step behind him, acted like he didn't have a mind of his own. Though Jayden suspected deep down that he did, he just didn't know how to use it without Cole's permission. Jayden steeled himself as he maneuvered through the football banners and scarred lockers, hoping today would be one of the rare days they found someone else to terrorize. Instead, he caught the flicker of Cole's blonde hair and that familiar predatory grin the moment he entered the building. "Morning, Wheels," Cole drawled as he blocked Jayden's path, shifting his weight like a lion stretching before the hunt. Brett circled behind, scanning for teachers, though they rarely intervened. Jayden maintained eye contact, refusing to give Cole the satisfaction of seeing fear. He'd learned that looking away only made things worse. Cole leaned down, his voice low but sharp, still rolling around like someone forgot to throw out the broken parts. Brett laughed on cue, the sound hollow, the kind that followed Jayden through the hall even after the boys walked away. Jayden didn't react. He couldn't. Ridgefall reacting was blood in the water. He simply tightened his grip on his wheels and maneuvered past them, swallowing the sting, focusing on making it through one more day. But fate had other plans. Later that afternoon, Jayden stopped by the locker room hallway, a shortcut he used on slow days to avoid the crowded main corridor. He regretted it instantly. The muffled voices of Cole and Brett drifted through the cracked locker room door, laughing, bragging, the usual poison laced with ego. Jayden meant to roll quietly past, but a single sentence froze him in place. "My dad made sure Carter never talked." That logbook he carried everywhere. Gone for good. Jayden's heart slammed against his ribs. Carter, his father. The man everyone said died in a freak quarry accident. Jayden inched closer, breath shallow. Brett asked what Cole meant, and Cole, always hungry for an audience, clarified without shame. He talked about toxins dumped in the water, the county inspector's bribe, the threats made to workers who spoke up. And then, like it was nothing more than gossip, Cole bragged that Thomas Carter had planned to expose the truth until Cole's father handled it. Jayden's vision blurred. He wanted to scream, to rush in, to demand answers, but his body locked in place. His father hadn't died trying to fix a jammed conveyor belt. He had been murdered. And the boys who tormented Jayden every day knew it, laughed about it, felt proud of it. Jayden's hand shook so violently the mop he carried slipped from his grasp, clattering across the linoleum. The laughter inside the locker room stopped. Footsteps scrambled. Brett's voice cracked, "Someone's out there." Jayden didn't wait. He spun his chair, adrenaline flooding his veins, and launched down the hall faster than he'd ever moved before. His wheels skidded when they caught a cracked tile, nearly throwing him off, but he pushed through the pain. Behind him the locker room door slammed open and Cole's furious shout echoed, "Get back here." Jayden didn't look back. He raced through the maze of empty hallways, heart pounding, every turn feeling like a narrow escape. Today it wasn't just bullying. Today they had a reason to make him disappear. Jayden shot around a corner and flattened himself against a shadowed stretch of wall, chest heaving. He listened, footsteps, angry, searching, then fading as Cole and Brett moved in the wrong direction. For a moment Jayden allowed himself a single shaky breath. His mind ran through the words he'd just heard, each one more devastating than the last. His dad had been right. Jayden had always sensed that the official story didn't fit, that Thomas Carter wasn't reckless, that something larger loomed behind the tragedy that changed their lives forever. Now he knew, and knowledge in Ridgefall was as dangerous as any weapon. Jayden navigated toward the exit, fingers trembling on the controls of his chair. He needed to get home. He needed to tell his mom. But even as he rolled into the sunlight, he felt the shift in the air, the unmistakable sense that whatever innocence he had left had been stripped away. The truth carried a price, and Cole Harrington had already decided Jayden wasn't allowed to live long enough to pay it. Jayden Carter spent the rest of that afternoon trying to outrun the truth echoing in his skull, but no amount of rolling through crowded hallways or burying himself in classwork could quiet the storm inside him. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard Cole Harrington's voice replaying the moment so casually, so carelessly, as if admitting to murder was nothing more than sharing gossip about the Friday night football game. Jayden's father hadn't died because of a broken safety latch. He hadn't slipped. He hadn't misjudged a step on the quarry scaffolding. He had been silenced, eliminated, taken from his family because he chose courage over corruption. The weight of that knowledge pressed on Jayden all the way until the final bell rang, and even then, he waited until the hallways thinned out before moving. He didn't want to risk passing Cole or Brett again. Not today, not with the fear now matched by something even more dangerous purpose. Outside, the Arizona heat wrapped around him like a suffocating blanket. The school buses belted out exhaust while students shoved earbuds in and hurried off toward weekend plans. Jayden headed toward the back parking lot, where he usually waited until the crowd cleared before starting the long push home. His hands were still trembling when he reached the edge of the lot, the truth pounding in rhythm with every push of his wheels. His father had been trying to protect Ridgefall, protect the workers, protect their family, and the price was his life. Jayden swallowed hard, fighting the tightness in his throat. He couldn't keep this to himself. He had to tell his mom. She had spent years drowning in grief, blaming herself for not seeing the signs that something was wrong at the quarry, for not being able to save him. Knowing the truth would shatter her, but not knowing was killing her slowly already. He knew it. He felt it. The truth mattered, even if it hurt, especially because it hurt. He maneuvered through the empty street behind the school, where only faint echoes of students lingered. But just as he approached the old basketball courts, a figure stepped out from behind a dumpster. Brett Maddox. He wasn't smiling like usual. In fact, he was pale, hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets, shoulders slumped in a way Jayden hadn't seen before. For a brief moment, Jayden considered turning around, heading straight back into the crowded front lot where adults were still lingering. But Brett held up a hand. "Relax," he said, though his voice was unsteady, thin around the edges. "I'm not here to mess with you." Jayden felt no comfort in those words. Brett was unpredictable, a follower with just enough fear in his bones to make him dangerous. Jayden kept his guard up as Brett looked around nervously, as if expecting Cole to materialize from thin air. "Look," Brett said, rubbing his face. "Cole's pissed. You know that, right? He thinks you heard something. He thinks you were going to talk." Jayden stiffened but didn't respond. Brett exhaled shakily. "He's not going to let this go." Jayden's pulse spiked. He expected threats. He expected more intimidation. But what startled him was the crack in Brett's voice, not smugness. Not cruelty, fear, real fear. Brett shifted from foot to foot, eyes darting toward the school as if Cole might be watching. "You need to be careful," he muttered. "Cole's daddy doesn't play around. If he thinks you gonna expose something, he'll make sure you can't." Jayden felt anger flare under his skin, sharp and hot. "Like he did to my father," Brett winced. For a split second, his mask slipped, revealing the guilt he had been choking on since the locker room conversation. But instead of answering, he muttered something and backed away, hands trembling, before disappearing between the fence posts. Jayden watched him go, confusion and dread twisting together inside his gut. Brett wasn't warning him out of kindness. Brett was warning him because something bigger, something worse was brewing. And Jayden was already in the crosshairs. By the time he reached the small two-bedroom apartment he shared with his mom, the sky was washed in shades of gold and deep red. Jayden pushed through the door and immediately sensed the quiet heaviness clinging to the living room. His mom wasn't home yet. Her evening shift at Ridgefall Memorial wouldn't end until close to midnight. The apartment felt different now, smaller somehow, claustrophobic with secrets. Jayden rolled to the coffee table and stared at the framed picture of his father, smiling, strong, one arm wrapped around Jayden's 11-year-old shoulders. It was taken just weeks before the accident. Jayden traced the edge of the glass, his throat tightening. What would his father want him to do? Stay quiet? Never. Thomas Carter believed in justice, even when justice was dangerous, especially then. Jayden felt something inside him steel, a quiet transformation forming under the weight of truth. He needed evidence, proof. Something he could bring to the world. Something that couldn't be erased or buried under the money and intimidation the Harrington family wielded so effortlessly. Jayden rolled into his bedroom and powered on his old laptop. He opened a blank document, hands shaking as he tried to write down everything he remembered from the hallway conversation. Dates, phrases, tones. Details, anything that might matter. He wrote until his fingers ached, pausing only when a sharp knock echoed through the apartment. Jayden's heart lurched. It was too early for his mother to be home, and no one visited them unannounced. He rolled toward the door slowly, careful not to let the wheels squeak. Another knock, sharper this time, followed by a voice he recognized immediately. Deputy Riker. His blood ran cold. "Jade, you home?" Riker called, his tone deceptively friendly. "Need a quick word." Jayden backed away from the peephole. Riker never came without a reason. And if Cole had told him anything about what happened near the locker room, Jayden knew this wasn't a courtesy visit. It was a warning, or worse, a prelude. Jayden stayed perfectly still, breathing shallow, until eventually Riker's footsteps retreated down the hallway. Even then, Jayden didn't relax. His home didn't feel safe anymore. Ridgefall didn't feel safe anymore. But he had no intention of backing down now. Not when he finally held a piece of the truth. Not when he finally understood why his father had died. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about finishing what his father started. And if Ridgefall thought Jayden Carter would keep quiet, they were about to learn how wrong they were. By the time Jayden woke the next morning, the brief comfort of sleep had already evaporated into the crushing realization of what he now knew. His father had been murdered, and the Harrington family had buried the truth so deep the entire town had accepted the lie without question. Jayden moved slowly, pushing his wheelchair toward the kitchen where sunlight cut through the blinds in thin stripes. He hadn't told his mother anything yet. She hadn't come home until nearly dawn, exhausted from back-to-back emergency shifts. He had heard her footsteps drag across the living room before she collapsed into bed. Jayden had wanted to go to her door, to wake her, to say everything he had learned in a single breath. But something held him back. He needed more than a story. He needed proof. He needed something that couldn't be dismissed as paranoia or rumor. Ridgefall had seen enough lies to ignore the truth unless it came packaged with evidence so undeniable even the Harringtons couldn't twist it. And that meant Jayden had to be careful. More careful than he had ever been in his life. When he rolled out of the apartment complex, he scanned the parking lot with more caution than usual, noting every unfamiliar truck, every passerby who watched a little too long. He felt the weight of eyes everywhere, though he couldn't tell which ones belonged to normal neighbors and which ones were planted by Riker. Cole, or worse, the men who answered directly to Cole's father. Ridgefall was small enough that secrets rarely stayed secret, but it was also small enough that danger could hide in plain sight. The deeper Jayden moved into town, the more aware he became of how the community operated under invisible forces. Some people walked confidently. Others carried the uncertainty of those who knew they were living beside something toxic, both literally and figuratively. Jayden realized then how deeply the Harrington family's influence ran. The quarry wasn't just a job site. It was a leash wrapped around every household that relied on its paychecks. People knew, even if they didn't speak it aloud. They knew something was wrong. But knowing and acting were two different things, especially when speaking out meant risking your livelihood or your life. Jayden's father had acted, and he had died for it. As he approached the school, Jayden felt the shift in atmosphere. Normally, students milled around, laughing, complaining, gossiping. Today, conversations paused when he rolled by. Some students looked at him with pity, others with curiosity, and a few with open hostility. News traveled fast in Ridgefall High, and Cole's twisted version of the previous day's events had already circulated. Jayden heard whispers about a fight, about Jayden supposedly spying, about how Cole had been forced to defend himself. None of it was true, of course, but truth rarely mattered when privilege told the story first. Jayden maneuvered through the hallway, keeping his face steady even as adrenaline surged. He expected Cole to show up, he just didn't know from which direction. And sure enough, within minutes, the crowd parted slightly as Cole Harrington strolled forward with a practiced grin, eyes cold with calculation. Brett lingered behind him, noticeably quieter today, shoulders hunched as if bracing for impact. Cole leaned casually against the locker door, tapping it with his knuckles, and spoke loud enough for others to hear. "Look who's rolling in like nothing happened." Jayden said nothing, refusing to feed the arrogance. Cole smirked. "My dad says people who don't know their place end up causing trouble. And trouble has consequences." Jayden recognized the threat immediately, but he held his ground, forcing Cole to be the one to walk away. Cole did, eventually, though not without whispering a final warning through clenched teeth. Keep pushing, Carter, see where it gets you. The rest of the school day passed like a storm waiting to break. Jayden fought to stay focused, but every class felt like a countdown to something inevitable. His teachers barely met his eyes, whether out of fear, indifference, or complicity, he couldn't tell. During lunch, he sat alone as usual, though today the cafeteria felt like a stage where every glance carried a different interpretation of his presence. Some students avoided him entirely, as if being near him invited trouble. Others stared hungry for drama. Only a few looked conflicted, their expressions carrying hints of guilt or uncomfortable recognition. Jayden wondered if any of them suspected the truth behind the quarry's practices. Many of their families worked there. Many had suffered unexplained illnesses, unexplained losses. Maybe deep down they knew something wasn't right. Maybe that was why Cole worked so hard to remain untouchable, because the truth once exposed couldn't be shoved back into silence. It would explode, and the fragments would tear Ridgefall apart. Jayden tightened his grip on his wheels. If that's what needed to happen, then so be it. After school, as Jayden rolled toward home, he kept replaying Brett's warning from the day before. The fear in Brett's voice hadn't been fake. Something was unraveling among the Harrington circle, and Brett, caught between loyalty and self-preservation, was struggling to keep up. Jayden wondered if Brett might become an unexpected source of information later, if guilt might force him to crack under pressure. But now wasn't the time to rely on maybes. Jayden needed concrete evidence, something to validate what he heard, something no one could destroy or bury. That's when the memory hit him, his father's old logbook, the one he carried everywhere. The one he wrote in almost obsessively during the final months of his life. Jayden remembered asking his father once what he wrote down, and Thomas had smiled, a tired but determined expression. The truth, he said. For when someone finally needs it, Jayden hadn't understood then. But now he did. And if Cole's admission was true, that logbook hadn't been entirely destroyed. There had to be another copy. His father wasn't careless. He wouldn't leave their fate to a single notebook. Not when he knew the kind of men he was standing against. That night, Jayden scoured his apartment for any clues. He dug through old storage bins, photo boxes, toolkits his father once used. Nothing. But the absence of physical evidence didn't kill his hope. Instead, it sharpened it. His father was methodical, strategic, always 2 steps ahead. He wouldn't hide something this important at home where it could be found or burned so easily. Ridgefall had forests, abandoned structures, fishing spots, hidden corners known only to locals. Jayden's father had been a man of routine. He must have left something somewhere. Jayden felt determination take root in his chest. Whatever it took, he would find it. And once he did, Ridgefall would no longer be able to pretend. The truth was waking up, and Jayden was no longer afraid to carry it. The field trip to Eagle Summit had hung over Ridgefall high like a yearly obligation everyone pretended to enjoy but secretly dreaded. Students called it team building, teachers called it mandatory. And Jayden Carter knew it for what it really was, a long walk through rugged terrain designed with the assumption that every kid had working legs. Every year he hated it. The uneven dirt trails, the narrow ledges, the constant stares from kids wondering whether he would slow the group down. But this year the trip carried a new, sick edge. Ever since Jayden overheard the truth about his father's death, he'd felt the world tilting, as if Ridgefall itself had shifted into a place he no longer fully recognized. He woke that morning with a knot in his stomach so tight it felt like a warning. Not fear, not nervous instinct, something was coming. And he was right. His mom had already left for her hospital shift when he rolled out the door, and Jayden paused in the quiet kitchen long enough to slip something into his backpack, a cheap, voice-activated recorder he'd bought months ago to capture lectures. That morning, it was no longer a school tool, it was insurance. If Cole Harrington wanted to corner him, Jayden would have the one thing that mattered: evidence, proof. The truth preserved with more permanence than a whispered accusation. As he boarded the school bus equipped with a lift that groaned every time it carried his chair inside, Jayden felt the weight of his decision settle on his shoulders. He wasn't just protecting himself, he was protecting what remained of his father's story, a story someone had killed to bury. The ride up the mountain was loud and restless, filled with chatter about hiking snacks, TikToks, and who would sneak off to smoke behind the ranger cabin. Jayden sat in the back, observing. Cole and Brett were near the front, surrounded by their usual orbit of athletes and honor roll kids eager to stay on the right side of the Harrington name. Cole kept casting glances backward, not obvious ones, but sharp, targeted, like he was checking whether Jayden still existed. Jayden held his gaze once. Cole smirked, the kind of smirk that promised something unpleasant. Brett, sitting beside him, didn't look back at all. His shoulders were rounded, his fingers tapping anxiously against the bus seat, his foot bouncing fast enough to rattle the metal floor. Jayden recognized guilt when he saw it. It wrapped around Brett like a second skin. Whatever Cole had planned, Brett was struggling to live with it. That was the only comfort Jayden had on that bus ride. The knowledge that at least one of them still had a conscience, even if it wasn't strong enough to stop anything. When the bus finally lurched to a stop at the Eagle Summit trailhead, Jayden braced himself. The mountain wasn't massive, but it was unforgiving. Jagged ridges carved deep shadows into the earth, and the hiking path carried a reputation for twisting unexpectedly around cliffs with drop-off so steep they made even the bravest students keep a careful distance. Teachers lined up the students and repeated the same safety speech they gave every year: stay together, stay on the trail, use the buddy system. Jayden almost laughed. If the school cared about safety, they wouldn't have ignored everything he'd endured for the past 2 years. They wouldn't have allowed Cole to turn the halls into a hunting ground. As the groups began to separate into slow, medium, and fast hikers, Jayden spotted Cole weaving through the clusters, eyes locked on him with calculation. Jayden's pulse quickened. He rolled forward anyway. If he stopped, if he hesitated, he'd only give them more confidence. But he kept one hand near the zipper of his backpack, checking the recorder again, a lifeline, a witness. Mr. Loomis, the chaperone, called out assignments for the buddy system, pairing Jayden with a girl he barely knew. But before she could approach, Cole stepped in smoothly, smiling a rehearsed smile. "Don't worry about it, Mr. Loomis," he said. "We'll help him, we've got him." The teacher hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough for Jayden to see uncertainty flicker behind his tired eyes, but he surrendered quickly. No one contradicted the Harringtons, not even teachers who should have known better. "All right," Mr. Loomis said with a nod, already turning away. And just like that, Jayden's fate was handed over to the last people who should have been anywhere near him. The group moved ahead, students laughing, backpacks bouncing, oblivious to the danger forming behind them. Jayden rolled forward as Cole and Brett flanked him, one on each side, guiding him off the main trail with subtle pressure and deceptive friendliness. "We were taking the scenic route," Cole said lightly, as though narrating a commercial for a nature trail. Brett kept his head down, pushing branches aside without meeting Jayden's gaze. It didn't take long for the main voices of the class to fade into the distance. Swallowed by the rustling trees and the crunch of dirt underfoot, Jayden's breath tightened, but he forced himself to stay sharp, to watch for escape routes, to memorize the terrain. The forest thickened around them, sunlight filtering through leaves in fractured patterns as the trio veered off the marked trail. Roots twisted under the wheels of Jayden's chair, jolting him violently. Cole watched every bump with satisfaction, like each jolt confirmed his superiority. "You know," he murmured, "it's funny. My dad always said some people just make life harder than it has to be. Some people just don't know when to stop digging." Jayden knew what he meant. Cole wasn't subtle. He didn't want to be, but Jayden refused to flinch. "Your dad would know," he replied. "He's an expert at digging." Cole's smile vanished for half a second, replaced by a flicker of rage that exposed his real intentions. As the trees began to thin, the faint whistle of wind hinted at the drop ahead. Eagle Summit wasn't far. Jayden recognized the terrain. He'd been there before, years ago, when the world still felt safe, and his father's voice echoed through the canyon as he described every peak and cliff with excitement. That memory felt cruel now. Cole stepped behind the wheelchair, gripping the handles with too much force as he maneuvered Jayden toward the ridge. Brett hesitated several yards back, staring at the ground, fists clenched. Jayden glanced over his shoulder. "Brett," he said softly. The name hung in the air like a plea. Brett swallowed hard but didn't move. Cole leaned close. "You really should have kept your mouth shut," he whispered. Jayden felt the push before he heard it, the sharp, brutal kick that slammed into the wheelchair frame and sent him flying forward toward the edge. The world tilted, the ground vanished, and the sky rushed up around him. His breath ripped from his chest as the chair rocketed downward, and Jayden reached instinctively for anything rock, root, branch, until his hand caught a knotted limb jutting from the cliffside. His body jerked violently, pain tore through his shoulder. His wheelchair plummeted past him, metal scraping against rock, before it disappeared into the canyon below. Above him, Cole peered over the edge with a look of greedy triumph. And that was the moment Jayden knew they hadn't come to scare him. They had come to finish what Harrington Quarry started. Jayden's fingers clung to the gnarled root with every ounce of strength left in his arms. His shoulder throbbed with a pain so sharp it made his vision pulse, but letting go wasn't an option. The canyon below yawned open like a hungry mouth, wind tearing upward in violent gusts that made his legs swing uselessly over the void. He tried to find his voice, to call for help, but the air was stolen from his lungs by the sheer terror of hanging between life and death. Above him, Cole's silhouette shifted against the sun, and for a moment, Jayden saw not a classmate but a stranger, someone shaped entirely by cruelty, entitlement, and a lifetime of being told the world belongs to him. Cole crouched at the edge, studying Jayden with a cold detachment that made the moment even more horrifying. "Should be minded your business, Carter," he said, his voice steady, too steady. "My dad always said some people don't deserve second chances." Jayden grit his teeth and held tighter. He wouldn't give Cole the fear he wanted to see, not now. Not when the truth was finally within reach. Brett stood several feet away, pale and shaking, his eyes wide as he watched Jayden dangle. He looked like he'd been punched in the gut, like reality had finally slammed into him with a force he wasn't ready for. His hands fluttered at his sides, useless, desperate. "Cole, man, this is crazy," he said, voice cracking. "We didn't come out here to shut up," Cole snapped without looking back. "You think he wasn't going to run his mouth? You think he wasn't going to ruin everything?" Brett swallowed hard, but his feet stayed planted. He didn't move to help Jayden, but he didn't move to finish him off either. He existed in that space between guilt and fear, trapped by a lifetime of following orders he didn't believe in. Jayden wanted to scream at him, to demand he step up, but every muscle in his body was focused on holding on. The cliffside groaned beneath him as chunks of dirt and stone slid loose. If the root gave way, nothing would save him. Cole straightened and kicked a loose rock toward Jayden, sending it tumbling past him into the abyss. The sound of it bouncing against the canyon walls hit Jayden like a warning. Each echo marked how close he was to sharing the same fate. But as Cole reached for another rock, something shifted in the forest behind them, a heavy thud, a crack of branches, the unmistakable roar of an engine revving in low gear. Cole whipped around, startled. Brett took a step back. Jayden's heart seized not in fear but in stunned confusion. The sound grew louder, closer, until two massive figures burst through the tree line, sunlight flashing off chrome and leather patches. Frank Dalton and Big Mike Ramirez emerged like thunder, boots slamming into the dirt, faces carved in fury so fierce even Cole stumbled in shock. They weren't supposed to be here. No one was supposed to be here. But somehow they had heard Jayden. Somehow they had known something was wrong. Frank crossed the distance in seconds, his heavy boots shaking the earth near the cliff's edge. When he slung himself onto his stomach and reached over the ledge, Jayden felt the breath leave his body. A massive, tattooed arm stretched toward him, fingers brushing the air inches from his "Grab on, kid!" Frank barked, his voice strained but commanding. Jayden tried to lift his arm, but his shoulder screamed in protest. His grip on the root weakened dangerously. Dirt crumbled beneath his fingers. A fresh wave of panic surged through him. If he slipped now, it would be over before Frank could react. "Come on, Jayden," Frank growled, lowering himself even farther. "Don't you quit on me?" Jayden gathered the last remnants of strength he had and forced his hand upward. Their fingertips collided once, slipped, then finally locked. Frank's grip clamped around Jayden's wrist like steel, unyielding. His muscles bulged as he anchored himself to the ground, veins standing out as he strained. "I've got you," he said, voice shaking with effort, and for the first time since the fall, Jayden felt a flicker of hope. Cole, snapping out of his shock, charged forward with a shout, "Get away from him!" But Big Mike stepped between them like a wall, like a mountain, and rammed Cole backward with a single shove that sent him sprawling into the dirt. Cole scrambled up furious, but Mike cracked his knuckles, his expression promising devastation if Cole took one more step. Brett didn't move at all. His eyes bounced from Jayden to the bikers to the canyon. And Jayden saw something break inside him. Whatever loyalty he had to Cole snapped under the weight of reality. Brett whispered something, maybe an apology, maybe just fear, but the wind stole the words before Jayden could decipher them. Cole lunged again, but Mike caught him by the collar, yanking him backward with enough force to make Cole gasp. "Touch that kid," Mike growled, "and you will be the one going over the edge." Cole froze. For the first time, genuine fear cracked through his arrogance. Frank heaved, sliding backward inch by inch, dragging Jayden up the cliffside. Jayden's arm burned, his body shaking with exhaustion, but he held on to Frank with everything he had left. The world above him blurred as tears mixed with sweat on his face, but he refused to let go. He could not after coming this far, not after learning the truth about his father, not after fighting for every breath. And then, with one final brutal pull, Frank dragged Jayden over the edge. They collapsed onto the rocky ground together, Frank rolling onto his back and gasping for air while Jayden stared up at the sky, chest heaving. The sun seemed brighter than before, too bright for the pain still thrumming through his body. He wasn't safe, not yet. But he was alive. Cole shrieked, his voice wild, unhinged. "You don't know what you're redoing! My dad's going to destroy all of you." Mike released his collar only to shove him again, sending him stumbling into Brett, who barely caught him. Brett's face twisted, shame, confusion, anger all tangled together, but he didn't step between Cole and the bikers. Not this time. Whatever blind loyalty he once clung to had been shattered the moment he watched someone fall because of him. The forest around them buzzed with tension as birds scattered and wind whipped through the branches. Jayden pushed himself upward, muscles trembling as Frank helped him sit. "You're one tough kid," Frank muttered, shaking his head. "Next time you call for help, don't wait until you're hanging off a cliff." Jayden managed a breathless, pained laugh. Didn't exactly have a choice. But the moment of relief didn't last long. Sirens wailed in the distance fast, closing in. Cole straightened with triumph glinting in his eyes. "You hear that?" he spat. "They were not here for me." Jayden looked at Frank, who clenched his jaw tightly. He already knew what Jayden feared. The authorities in Ridgefall never answered to justice, they answered to the Harringtons. And the fight for truth had only just begun. The distant sirens wailed louder with every passing second, echoing against the canyon walls until it felt like the entire mountain trembled under their approach. Jayden watched the trailing pulse with flashes of red and blue, each burst slicing through the branches like a warning. Frank stiffened beside him, jaw clenched, eyes narrowing in the direction of the approaching vehicles. Big Mike stood over Cole with arms crossed, ready for whatever storm was about to break. Brett hovered at the edge of the clearing, torn between panic and remorse, his face pale as he stared at the lights drawing closer. Jayden's pulse pounded in his ears. The rescue wasn't a rescue at all. The authorities weren't coming to save him, they were coming to control the narrative, to bury the truth before it ever reached daylight. And the Harringtons had enough power in Ridgefall to twist any situation into the version that benefited them most. Cole knew it. He stood straighter now, confidence returning like color to his cheeks. The moment the first sheriff's SUV skidded to a stop, Deputy Marshal Riker stepped out with a hand already resting near his holster. His expression was carved from stone, but Jayden recognized the glimmer of anticipation in his eyes. This wasn't a man who had come to investigate, he had come to enforce an outcome. Behind him, two other deputies flanked the vehicles, hands on radios, scanning the scene with suspicion aimed entirely in the wrong direction. Riker's gaze swept across the clearing, lingering briefly on Cole, who looked shaken but unharmed enough to play innocent. Then Riker's attention settled on Frank and Mike, his lip curling with disgust. "Step away from the boy," he ordered sharply, pointing at Frank. Now, Frank didn't move. He stood like a barrier, shoulders squared, muscles taut, one protective hand hovering just behind Jayden. His voice was calm but dangerous. "The boy was pushed off a cliff. Maybe focus on the ones who did it." Riker barked a humorless laugh. "Is that the story you were going with?" he said. "Funny how whenever trouble hits this town your people are in the middle of it." Frank raised an eyebrow, slow and unimpressed. "My people? You mean the ones who just saved a kid from dying?" Riker ignored the comment and took a step closer, surveying Jayden with a look of false concern. "You okay, son? These men give you a hard time, you can tell me. We'll take care of you." Jayden felt sick. He knew exactly what Riker was doing, trying to paint the bikers as the threat, rewriting the situation before anyone else could speak. He forced himself to sit straighter, even though every muscle ached. "They saved my life," Jayden said firmly. "The danger came from them." He jerked his chin toward Cole, and Riker's expression didn't change. He didn't even look at the boys. "That's a big accusation," he said flatly. "And not one anyone's going to believe coming from." He stopped himself, but the unfinished sentence hung in the air like poison. Jayden knew the word he had been about to use. It stung in ways deeper than the physical pain still radiating through his body. Cole stepped forward with perfectly timed trembling. "Deputy, we were trying to help him. He got too close to the edge. We tried to stop the chair, but it was too late." His voice wavered just enough to sound genuine. Brett stared at him, horrified. The lie was effortless, well practiced. Riker nodded sympathetically, placing a steady hand on Cole's shoulder. "I figured as much. You boys always do the right thing." The statement hit Jayden like a slap. Always do the right thing. Cole had nearly killed him, and Riker was treating him like a victim. Jayden opened his mouth, but Frank squeezed his arm lightly, a silent message to stay steady. Not yet. Not until they knew how far Riker was willing to go. Riker took another step toward the bikers. "You said," gesturing to Frank and Mike, "on your knees. Hands behind your heads." Frank snorted. "Not happening." Mike's eyes flicked to the deputies' positions, calculating angles, distances. They weren't afraid, they were ready. But Jayden's heart hammered. A fight here at the top of the cliff would end in chaos and likely bloodshed. He needed to shift the momentum before Riker escalated things further. "I have evidence," Jayden said loudly, surprising everyone, even himself. Riker froze, eyes narrowing. "What evidence?" Jayden reached down into his sock, fingers trembling slightly, and pulled out the tiny micro-SD card he'd hidden before Cole smashed his phone. He held it up between two fingers, letting it catch the light. "This," he said. "It recorded everything. Cole talking about what his dad did. What happened to my father, what they planned to do to me, all of it." Cole's face drained of color. Brett inhaled sharply, eyes widening in shock. Riker's expression twisted into barely contained rage. "Give me that," the deputy said, stepping toward Jayden with an outstretched hand. Jayden pulled the card back protectively. "No. And it's already backed up. My friends have copies. You can't make this disappear." The lie rolled off his tongue so smoothly he almost believed it himself. Riker stared at him for a long moment, weighing the threat. Cole shifted uncomfortably, suddenly less confident with the backup of law enforcement, not feeling as secure as before. Jayden watched the fear bloom in Cole's eyes. Good, let him feel what fear really was. Riker exhaled through his nose, forcing his anger into a tight smile. "Why don't we all head back into town and sort this out properly," he said. "No need for anyone to get hurt." Frank stepped forward, his voice low. "He's not going anywhere alone, not with you." Riker stiffened. "I'm not asking." Jayden lifted his chin. "Neither am I." He couldn't explain how, but strength had returned to him, not in his body but in his resolve. He wasn't the scared kid being mocked in hallways anymore. He wasn't the quiet wheelchair-bound teenager others assumed would never fight back. He was the son of a man who had died for the truth, and now that truth lived inside him, pulling him upright even when his body wanted to collapse. Behind Riker, more officers arrived, splitting into two directions, one group subtly positioning themselves between the bikers and the trail leading back to town, the other hovering near Cole and Brett like guards protecting royalty. The symbolism wasn't lost on Jayden. Ridgefall wasn't a town with a justice system, it was a chessboard where the powerful placed the pieces and everyone else obeyed. But the difference now was that Jayden finally had something the Harringtons couldn't bribe, threaten, or crush: evidence. A voice they couldn't silence. Frank leaned closer to Jayden. "You ready for what's coming?" he murmured quietly. Jayden swallowed hard but nodded. "I have to be." The sirens from the last vehicle tapered off, replaced by the hum of engines and the low mutters of deputies forming their narrative. Now it was a standoff: authority against truth, wealth against justice, intimidation against survival. And for the first time, Jayden realized he wasn't standing alone. Frank and Mike weren't just rescuers, they were allies, protectors, people who had seen corruption before and refused to bow to it. Far below them, the canyon winds roared through the valley, as if bearing witness to the moment everything changed. Jayden clutched the stick hard in his fist, feeling its edges bite into his palm. It ground him, centered him. No matter what Riker or Cole or anyone else said, he had the truth, and he wasn't letting it go. Not now, not ever. Frank and Big Mike refused to let the deputies shove them aside as the confrontation at Eagle Summit deepened. Once it became clear that Jayden wouldn't be taken quietly, Riker's patience began to thin like brittle thread. More officers had arrived, 5 now, forming a crooked half-circle around the boy and the bikers, each of them tense, hands hovering over holsters or resting against tasers. The air buzzed with that dangerous stillness that so often preceded violence. Jayden tightened his grip on the cess card as if it were the only anchor keeping him steady. In a way it was. It was the truth his father had died for, the truth Cole had tried to kill him for. And now, standing between two men who had risked everything to save him, Jayden realized that truth alone was no longer enough. He needed to survive long enough to use it. Riker scanned the clearing like a man weighing risks and reputations. His eyes settled on Jayden. "You're coming with us," he said evenly. Without them, he jerked his head toward Frank and Mike. "You don't get a choice." Jayden's voice was steady, even though fear twisted deep inside his chest. "I'm not going anywhere with you. You already tried to cover up what happened to my dad. I'm not letting you cover this up too." A murmur rippled through the younger deputies, uncertainty, hesitation, but Riker shot them a look that snapped them back into silence. Cole, now crouched near Brett, regained some of his confidence as he watched Riker take control. "He's lying," he said with a shaky laugh. "Why would I try to hurt him? Everyone saw how out of control his chair was." He rolled too close to the edge. Brett flinched, as though the lie physically struck him. Jayden met Brett's eyes, and for a moment something unspoken passed between them: remorse, fear, and the faintest spark of humanity buried beneath years of manipulation. Brett lowered his gaze, unable to meet Jayden's stare for more than a heartbeat. Riker ignored all of it. "Boys," he said to the deputies beside him, "take our good Samaritans into custody. We will handle the kid." The word kid struck Jayden like a threat. It stripped him of agency, reducing him to someone they could dismiss, someone whose truth didn't matter. Frank stepped forward before the deputies could react. "You're not laying a hand on him." Big Mike mirrored him, cracking his knuckles in a slow, deliberate rhythm that made even the officers hesitate. Riker's jaw ticked. "You want to be charged with obstruction," Frank smirked. "You think I care about charges from a corrupt department?" The word corrupt hit harder than a thrown punch. Even the forest seemed to still. Riker's face darkened. "Take them down." 2 deputies surged forward, but Frank moved like a hammer through fog, fast and unstoppable. He caught the first deputy's wrist mid-reach, twisted, and sent the man sprawling into the dirt with a scream. Big Mike grabbed the second deputy by the vest and lifted him off the ground like he weighed nothing. The other officers scrambled backward, hands on weapons, unsure whether to draw firearms or risk escalating the situation into something that would leave blood soaking into the pine needles. Jayden's heart thudded wildly as chaos exploded around him. He didn't want violence. He didn't want anyone getting hurt because of him. But watching Riker order his men around like pawns, watching Cole smirk behind them as if the law belonged to him, Jayden realized something chillingly accurate. Violence had already been chosen long before he arrived at that mountain. He hadn't initiated anything, he was just refusing to be erased. A deputy yanked out a taser and aimed it directly at Big Mike, who snarled but didn't drop the officer he held.
"Put him down!" The deputy shouted, "Rypark, use it!"
But before the officer fired, Jayden pushed his chair forward. "Stop." The word cracked through the clearing like lightning. Everyone froze. Jayden's voice shook, but his conviction didn't falter. "You were not arresting them," he said, nodding toward Frank and Mike. "They saved me. They were the only reason I'm alive." Riker walked toward Jayden slowly, measured steps, crushing twigs beneath his boots. "You don't understand how the world works, son," he said. "People lie. People make things up to avoid responsibility." And he jabbed a finger toward Jayden's chest. "You rein over your head. Let the adults handle this." Jayden wanted to snap back, but before he could, Frank's voice rumbled behind him. "Don't talk to him like he's stupid. He's the only honest one here." Riker's face twisted in contempt. In a swift motion, he reached for Jayden's backpack, clearly intending to search for the ST card. Jayden jerked backward instinctively, wheels skidding across loose gravel. The sudden movement sent a jolt up his spine, and for a moment, the world wavered. Riker lunged again, but Frank stepped between them, shoving Riker's arm away hard enough to stagger him. That was the tipping point. 3 deputies raised their weapons, not guns, but batons and tasers, the kind used when they wanted compliance without outrage. Jayden felt fear spike again, but before the officers could advance, a new sound cut through the madness. Distant engines, dozens of them. Low, thunderous, unmistakable. Frank and Mike exchanged a look that subtle, wordless communication of men who had been in too many battles to count. Frank's lips twitched. "Looks like the boys heard us." A moment later, the forest vibrated with the arrival of nearly a dozen motorcycles rumbling up the trail, tires grinding against dirt and rock. Members of the Sons of Vengeance poured into the clearing like a cavalry made of leather, steel, and defiance. Their jackets were sun-faded but unmistakable, each marked with the snarling emblem of their club. Dust swirled around them as they parked in a protective semicircle. The deputies recoiled instinctively. Cole stumbled backward, mouth falling open. Brett froze. Riker's face drained of color. Leading the pack was Sawyer Briggs, the club president, a towering man with scars painting maps across his knuckles. He dismounted and surveyed the scene with a slow, deadly calm. "Heard someone touched one of ours," Sawyer said, nodding at Jayden. "That true?" Frank folded his arms. "They were trying to arrest us for saving the kid." Sawyer laughed a deep, humorless sound and stepped forward until he stood toe to toe with Riker. "Funny, because I heard different. I heard this deputy watched a murder attempt and tried to spin it into a rescue." Riker bristled. "Get your men out of here, now." Sawyer tilted his head. "This mountain doesn't belong to your boss, and neither does the kid." Jayden's throat tightened. The bikers weren't just backup, they were a shield against a system designed to crush him. Riker's fingers twitched near his belt. But even he wasn't foolish enough to ignite a war against a group of men who outnumbered and outmatched his deputies. Slowly, reluctantly, he signaled for his officers to lower their weapons. "Fine," he snapped, "but this isn't over." Sawyer smirked. "You're right. It's just getting started." The tension bled out of the air slowly, though not enough to be called safety. Jayden exhaled shakily as Frank crouched beside him. "You gassed." Jayden nodded. "For now." Sawyer turned to him. "We were getting you off this mountain, kid, and we making sure no one touches you again." Jayden glanced at the terrified look plastered across Cole's face, at Brett's trembling hands, at Riker's simmering rage, and he realized the truth. The line had been drawn, and Ridgefall would never be the same again. Getting Jayden off the mountain wasn't as simple as Sawyer Briggs made it sound. The moment the bikers formed a protective ring around him, the deputies retreated with stiff postures and bitter expressions, but their departure was more tactical than fearful. They walked backward with their hands still hovering above their belts, eyes flicking constantly between the club members as though waiting for a slip, a mistake, any excuse to regain control. Riker was the last to turn, his gaze lingering on Jayden like a promise of retribution. "Enjoy your victory lap," he muttered. "Your next one won't be so easy." Jayden clutched the C card more tightly, not because he feared losing it in that moment, because Riker's tone made the air colder. The deputy wasn't backing down, he was regrouping, and that meant the Harringtons were about to escalate. When the last police vehicle rolled out of sight, Sawyer exhaled, but the tension in his shoulders didn't soften. He scanned the tree line, the trail, the distant road, as if calculating how much time they had before something worse arrived. "We need to move," he said, "now." Frank lifted Jayden carefully, mindful of his injured shoulder, and positioned him onto the modified trike they used when hauling gear. It wasn't designed for passengers, much less someone recovering from a near-fatal fall. But the alternative, waiting on a mountain, where the law didn't protect him, was far more dangerous. Jayden winced as the cold metal frame pressed against his ribs, but he didn't complain. Pain meant survival. Pain meant he was still here. The engines roared back to life, one after another, until the entire clearing vibrated with the thunderous chorus of the Sons of Vengeance. Sawyer motioned for Frank to lead, then took the rear position, boxing Jayden in with layers of steel and loyalty the police couldn't fake or manipulate. As they rolled down the rocky trail, dust plumed behind them, the air thick with the smell of pine and gasoline. The descent was brutal. Each rut and rock sent sharp jolts through Jayden's bruised body, but he held onto the side rail, using the pain to stay alert. Above them, the wind carried faint echoes, sounds he couldn't decipher. Were they birds, branches, or something else, someone else already tracking their movements? Frank seemed to sense the same thing. He spoke over the rumbling engines without turning around. "Eyes open, kid. Harrington's dogs aren't done yet." Halfway down the mountain, they reached a narrow switchback where the forest pressed tightly on either side. The bikers slowed, scanning the shadows with heightened caution. Jayden felt the hair on his neck rise. The woods were too quiet. Even the birds had vanished. Big Mike muttered from behind, "Feels wrong out here." Sawyer's voice cut through the static in Jayden's mind. "It's an ambush spot. Keep your hands ready." Jayden swallowed. An ambush by who? Frank didn't sugarcoat his answer. "By anyone who doesn't want you talking." The thought hit like a punch. If the Harringtons had already alerted their private security teams, or worse, men who didn't wear uniforms but still answered to them, then the police weren't the only threat. Sawyer motioned for a full stop. Engines tapered down into low growls. The forest stood still, listening. Jayden's heartbeat thudded too loudly in his ears. Frank scanned the tree line with the sharp instincts of a man who had survived too many ambushes to underestimate danger. He pointed to the ridge above them. "Movement, 2 o'clock. Big Mike tensed. "Human, too big to be a deer," Frank confirmed. "Not a ranger either." Sawyer raised a fist, and the bikers formed a defensive half-circle, engines idling, ready to launch forward or backward at his signal. Jayden held his breath, staring into the shadows where Frank had pointed. Leaves rustled, a twig snapped, something shifted, and then nothing. The forest stilled again. Sawyer didn't relax. "Keep moving," he ordered. Eyes everywhere. They resumed their descent, faster this time, choosing momentum over caution. Whatever lurked in the forest wasn't ready to strike yet, but Jayden could feel its presence like a storm building pressure behind the hills. When they finally reached the base of the mountain, the road widened into a gravel clearing. Jayden expected relief to wash over him, but the moment the bikes rolled into the open, he saw a black SUV parked where the trail met the highway. Its windows were tinted darker than regulation allowed, and its engine idled with a soft, predatory purr. Frank cursed under his breath. "That's Harrington security." Jayden's stomach dropped. The bikers slowed, engines forming a rumbling warning. Sawyer stepped forward, shoulders broad, chin raised. The SUV door opened. A man in a sharp black suit stepped out, sunglasses reflecting nothing but sky. He moved with the confidence of someone who believed he owned every inch of road he stood on. "Gentlemen," he greeted, voice smooth, corporate solace. "We were here for the boy." Frank positioned himself directly in front of Jayden. "He's not going with you." The man smiled as though amused. "You misunderstand. We aren't asking." "Meh. Harrington is concerned about the safety of this young man. He wants to make sure the correct version of events is recorded." Jayden felt a shiver clamp down his spine. Correct version, not true version, not real version. Correct. Meaning the version they needed to protect themselves. Sawyer laughed once, a sound dripping with contempt. "You think we were letting you walk him into a van so you can rewrite the whole damn day? Try again." The man's smile cooled. "You're starting to interfere with matters far above your pay grade." Sawyer took a step closer, voice dropping into a tone that carried the weight of every fight he'd ever won. "You lay one hand on that kid and you'll find out real quick what my pay grade includes." The man in the suit exhaled slowly as if disappointed. 2 more security agents stepped out of the SUV, broad men in tactical gear, wearing earpieces and no insignias, professional, expensive. Loyal to money, not morality. One of them shifted his stance, hand brushing the outline of a weapon beneath his jacket. Jayden stiffened. "Sawyer," he whispered. Sawyer lifted a hand to silence him. "We were not here to play with rented thugs," he said. "We were leaving." Get in our way and you'll regret it. The suited man nodded once as if conceding something. Very well, he said. But as the bikers began to move around the SUV, he added, but the boy can't outrun the truth. And neither can you. Jayden felt his skin crawl. Not because of the words, but because of the calm certainty behind them. The Harringtons weren't panicking. They were planning, and whatever they planned next would be worse, much worse. The club escorted Jayden back onto the main highway, surrounding him so tightly that cars passing on the opposite side couldn't even glimpse who they were protecting. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt. Jayden gripped the rail as his body shook, not from the rough ride, but from everything he had just witnessed. The world he thought he understood had opened into something darker, deeper, more dangerous. Frank leaned toward him as they rode. Your life just got real complicated, kid. Jayden nodded slowly. It already was. The road unwound before them, leading back toward Ridgefall. A town built on lies, a town that had learned to fear the truth. A town where Jayden was no longer just a student or a victim, he was a threat. And the Harringtons would do whatever it took to make sure threats disappeared. As the bikers formed a tighter formation around him, Jayden's injured shoulder throbbed, but his resolve hardened. Someone had tried to kill him. Someone had murdered his father, and now the whole town would know. This wasn't survival anymore, this was war. By the time the bikers reached Ridgefall Memorial Hospital, Jayden's head pounded from exhaustion, adrenaline, and the lingering ache in his shoulder. The fluorescent lights of the emergency entrance hit him like a slap, cold, sterile, and far too bright compared to the dim mountain trails they'd just escaped. Nurses rushed forward, shock flickering across their faces as they took in Jayden's battered condition, but the reaction was brief, because standing behind them, exactly where Jayden feared he'd be, was Assistant Chief Dr. Grantley Harrington, the younger brother of Cole's father. His presence wasn't a coincidence. Harringtons didn't leave loose ends lying around unless those loose ends had already been handled. The doctor's smile was thin, professional to anyone who didn't know better, but Jayden saw the tightness in his jaw, the calculation in his eyes. Get him inside, Dr. Harrington ordered sharply, snapping his fingers at two nurses. We need to evaluate him immediately for potential neurological complications. Trauma like this can affect judgment. The last word was emphasized, as if he were already building the foundation for the narrative he intended to use. Jayden's stomach dropped. They weren't just here to treat him, they were here to erase him. Frank pushed forward before the nurses could wheel Jayden away. He's not going anywhere without us. Dr. Harrington's expression hardened. This is a medical facility, not a clubhouse. You two have no authority here. Sawyer stepped beside Frank, blocking the doctor's path with a presence so imposing the nearby security guards stiffened. You really want to try to take him without witnesses? Sawyer asked. After what your family already pulled today, Dr. Harrington's smile cracked for a fraction of a second before returning even thinner. My nephew told me everything, he said smoothly. Jayden rolled too close to the cliff edge. It was an accident. Trauma victims sometimes fabricate details to cope. It's my responsibility to make sure he receives the psychiatric care he clearly needs. The word psychiatric care sliced into Jayden like ice. That was the plan. It had always been the plan. People locked in psychiatric evaluations couldn't talk to the press. They couldn't testify. They couldn't defend themselves. And the Harringtons could claim they'd been helping him the whole time. The nurses hesitated between instructions and fear, eyes flicking between Dr. Harrington and the wall of bikers. One of them whispered to another, too quietly for most to hear, but Jayden caught the words, is this the Carter kid? The one whose dad she didn't finish. She didn't have to. Ridgefall had a long memory, the hospital especially. His father had worked here before the quarry accident, before the truth had been buried. Jayden felt the shift in the room. The staff weren't loyal to the Harringtons, they were afraid of them. That fear-guided hands signed forms, kept mouths closed. But not all of them agreed with what was happening. The cracks were there if he looked closely. He needed to widen them. He straightened in his chair despite his injuries. I'm not gonna psych, he said firmly. You don't get to decide that. Dr. Harrington's smile sharpened. Actually, I do. As the attending physician, I can mandate a 72-hour hold for evaluation of mental instability following trauma. He turned to the nearest nurse. Prep room 214, he'll remain there under observation. The nurse blanched. Room 214 was used only for high-risk isolation. A place where patients had no visitors, no phone access, no communication. Perfect for disappearing someone. Before the nurses could touch him, Frank stepped between them and Jayden, placing one heavy hand on the wheelchair handles. You file that hold, Frank growled, and we'll contest it in court before the ink dries. Director Harrington folded his arms. You don't have standing. He does. Sawyer cut in, nodding toward Jayden. And so do we, because we witnessed the assault. And we'll testify, the doctor scoffed. Ex-con testimony from a biker gang. Sawyer leaned in so close the doctor went rigid. We re the ones who dragged him off a cliff alive. What did your nephew do today, Dare? Harrington opened his mouth, but whatever retort he intended died when hospital security arrived. 6 officers in dark blue uniforms, hands resting on their belts, eyes locked on the bikers. Their leader, a man named Pulaski, stepped forward. You folks need to back away. This kid needs care. Jayden shifted. What I need is a lawyer, and someone who doesn't work for the same family trying to bury the truth. Pulaski glared. Jayden glared back. The power dynamic hung in the air like a live wire. Then a new voice broke through the tension. What's going on here? Nurse Maria Carter, Jayden's mother, strode into the hallway, still wearing her scrubs, hair pulled back, badge crooked from rushing. Her eyes widened as she saw the bruises on her son's face, the dirt smeared across his clothing, the way he held his shoulder protectively. Jayden, she whispered, breath catching. Oh God, what happened? Jayden opened his mouth, but Druther Harrington cut in smoothly. He experienced a traumatic fall at Eagle Summit. The boys he was with tried to help, but he was confused and panicking, likely hallucinating due to concussion. We need to hold him for psychiatric evaluation. Jayden's mother snapped her gaze toward him, fire igniting behind her eyes. The hell you do, she said. The entire hallway froze. Few people ever spoke to a Harrington that way. Fewer survived the consequences. My son isn't going anywhere without my consent, she continued. And you will not diagnose him with anything until an outside specialist evaluates him. Drewster Harrington attempted a soothing smile. Maria, I know you're upset, but your son is clearly unstable. No, she cut him off. You're not committing him just because he knows something your family doesn't want out. Gasps rippled through the staff. The doctor's face hardened, the mask slipping entirely. You should be careful, Maria, he said softly. Accusations like that can cost someone their career. My career means nothing if my son ends up where you put Thomas. The words hit like a detonation. Silence swallowed the hallway. Even the bikers turned, eyes narrowing. Harrington's expression twisted with fury for a moment. His professional veneer shattered, revealing the ruthless machine underneath. But before he could retaliate, Sawyer stepped forward again, positioning himself beside Jayden's mother. You want this to go to court? He asked. Because we can do that. Hell, we can drag the county commissioner into it too. I'm sure he'd love to testify about the donations your brother made last month. Drewster Harrington's eyes flicked sharply. They all knew what Sawyer meant. Donations were never donations in Ridgefall. They were payments for silence, insurance against truth. After several long suffocating seconds, Drewster Harrington lifted his chin fine. We will do this by the book. He didn't mean it, but he had no choice, not with witnesses stacking up on both sides of the hallway. He gestured toward the nurses. Take him to a standard room, observation only. Jayden didn't relax until he felt Frank's hand squeeze his shoulder gently. You were not alone in this, the biker murmured. Jayden glanced at his mother. She stood tall, fierce, unmovable. For the first time since the fall, Jayden felt the faint glow of something he hadn't felt in days. Hope. But as a security guard escorted them to a room, Jayden caught sight of a shadow slipping around the corner. Cole Harrington, watching, listening, planning. Jayden's heartbeat quickened. The hospital wasn't safety, it was a battlefield, and the war had only widened its front lines. The moment Jayden was settled into a standard observation room, the hospital staff drifted away with a tension that clung to the air like static. Every nurse who passed the doorway hesitated before moving on, their eyes flicking between Jayden, his mother, and the bikers stationed just outside the threshold. It wasn't typical protocol for anyone to camp out in a hospital hallway, much less leather-clad men with steel-toed boots and expressions hard enough to dent concrete. But Ridgefall Memorial wasn't dealing with typical circumstances. The Harrington family had just attempted to funnel Jayden into psychiatric lockdown, and every employee with common sense realized the building had become a silent battleground. Jayden lay in the hospital bed, shoulder bandaged, ribs wrapped in his arm, but even lying down, he felt more alert than he had in his entire life. He wasn't safe here, not truly. Not in a place where the Harrington name was stamped on multiple wings and half the equipment had been donated by their corporation. But the difference now was that the Harringtons didn't control every inch of this space. Not with the Sons of Vengeance setting up their own perimeter. It started quietly. Just Frank and Big Mike in the hallway, leaning against opposite walls, arms crossed, making sure no unauthorized personnel got too close to the room. But within an hour after word spread that Jayden Carter was both alive and holding evidence implicating the most powerful family in Ridgefall, more bikers arrived. Not loud, not careless, strategic. They filed into the corridor, creating a silent barrier that stretched down both ends of the floor. Nurses whispered behind clipboards as they walked past. A few smiled at Jayden with cautious encouragement. as though grateful someone was finally standing up to the Harrington machine. Others hurried away quickly, fearful of being seen supporting the wrong side. Jayden watched them through the open doorway, the white lights flickering slightly overhead. "This isn't forever," his mom assured him, adjusting the blanket over his lap. "Just until we figure out the next step." Jayden nodded, though neither of them knew what that next step looked like. The truth was now out of its cage, and the Harringtons were scrambling dangerously to shove it back in. As the afternoon deepened, the hallway grew more crowded. Frank checked in on Jayden every 15 minutes, asking about his pain level, his nausea, whether he needed water. It felt strangely comforting, protective in a way Jayden hadn't expected from a stranger. Big Mike lingered near the elevators, watching every arrival with the intensity of a sentry guarding a war bunker. And Sawyer Briggs remained the calm center of it all, sitting in a plastic chair just outside the room, elbows on his knees, staring straight ahead at nothing and everything. His presence alone created a bubble no one dared penetrate. Jayden appreciated it, but he also felt a weight of guilt settle on his chest. These men were risking arrest, lawsuits, maybe even their lives for him, a kid they barely knew. A kid who had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time and uncovered a truth too big to ignore. "You don't have to stay," Jayden said quietly when Sawyer stepped into the room to check on him. Sawyer raised an eyebrow. "Yeah," he replied dryly, "and the Harringtons don't have to be corrupt. Yet here we are." Jayden tried to laugh, but the pain in his ribs stabbed sharply. Sawyer leaned against the wall. "Kid, the moment we pulled you off that cliff, we signed up. Don't argue." But their protective presence became even more crucial once the Harrington influence began tightening around the hospital like a vice. First came Drer. Harrington again, returning with falsified concern and a clipboard full of forms that Jayden's mother refused to sign. Then came hospital administrators with clipped voices and forced smiles, insisting they needed to evaluate the situation in a private conference room. Sawyer shut that down immediately, telling them any conversation involving Jayden would take place openly and with legal witnesses present. When the administrators tried again with more assertiveness, Big Mike simply stepped forward, cracked his knuckles, and the discussion ended on its own. Nowhere in the hospital policy manual existed a guideline for when confronted with 12 irritated members of a motorcycle club, but the staff were fast learners. They adapted. What they couldn't adapt was what came next. At approximately 6:45 p.m., while Jayden was drifting in and out of a pain-medicated haze, a code announcement sounded overhead, code white. "Hospital security alert." Jayden's mom stiffened. "Something's wrong," she whispered. Frank burst through the doorway seconds later. "We've got movement outside," he said. 3 black SUVs just pulled into the parking garage, no markings. Same kind of vehicles the private security guys used earlier. Jayden's pulse spiked. "They were here." Frank nodded grimly. They were not coming in through the front. They were circling. Sawyer rose from his chair, shifting instantly into command mode. "Form the wall," he ordered. The bikers moved as one, lining the hallway from end to end, forming a human barricade thicker and stronger than anything the hospital had ever seen. Security guards arrived at the far corner of the corridor, 2 of them panting, one clutching a radio. "We need this floor cleared," the guard said breathlessly. Sawyer stepped forward until their faces were inches apart. "You were not clearing anything," the guard swallowed. "We have orders. Your orders don't outrank our reason to be here," Sawyer growled. "You want this hallway empty? Go tell Harrington to come do it himself." The guard retreated. Not fast enough to seem scared, but not boldly enough to hide that he was. Jayden's mother closed the door, but didn't latch it. She wanted to hear every sound outside. Jayden's breath shook. His shoulder throbbed. He felt trapped in a room that was becoming both sanctuary and cage. "Mom," he whispered, "what if they get through?" She sat on the edge of the bed, brushing his cheek. "Then they'll have to go through me first." Her voice didn't waver. Jayden wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe all of them could hold the line. But the Harringtons didn't fight small. They fought like people who believed losing was impossible. And that made them more dangerous than any enemy he'd ever known. Outside the room, footsteps thundered from the far elevator, doors slammed, voices rose agitated, masculine, confident. Sawyer didn't shout, didn't bark orders. He simply lifted one hand. The bikers shifted, blocking every inch of the corridor with quiet, immovable power. The elevator dinged. The doors slid open. A group of private security operatives stepped out, tactical gear, bulletproof vests, earpieces. Jayden's heart lodged in his throat. This wasn't intimidation anymore. This was extraction. One of the operatives stepped forward. "We re here for Carter," he said. "Step aside." Sawyer smiled without humor. No. A ripple passed through the group as hands moved toward hidden weapons. This was moments away from turning deadly, and yet, for the first time in hours, Jayden didn't shrink. He didn't freeze. He didn't hide. His voice rang out from inside the room, loud enough for the operatives to hear. If you take me, he shouted, everyone will know why. I have evidence, and the whole damn town will see it. The operatives paused. One turned his head, listening to new orders in his earpiece. The shift was instant. They stepped back, not defeated, repositioning. Retreating to plan again, Sawyer exhaled sharply. They re-scared, he murmured. Not enough to give up, but enough to think twice. Jayden sagged against his pillows, sweat beading along his brow. They were going to keep coming, yes, Sawyer said. But so are we. The hallway remained a fortress. The war around Jayden had entered another phase. And Ridgefall Memorial Hospital, once neutral ground, had become the front line of a battle for truth that was only just beginning. The first sign that something was wrong came not from inside the hospital, but from the street outside. Around midnight, the Sons of Vengeance had settled into a rotation, some on the 6th floor guarding Jayden's room, others stationed outside near their bikes, acting as the club's eyes and ears. Jayden's mother had finally drifted into a light sleep in the reclining chair beside his bed, and the hospital had grown quiet. But even in silence, tension coiled around the building like wire. Jayden lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the fall, every word from Cole, every threat from Riker. He barely noticed Frank stepping in until the man spoke softly. "Kid," Frank said, his voice unusually strained, "you need to stay calm when I tell you this." Jayden's chest tightened. Calm was a luxury he didn't have anymore. "What happened?" he asked, sitting upright despite the stab of pain in his ribs. Frank hesitated. That alone frightened Jayden more than anything. "It's your house," Frank finally said. "It's gone." Jayden blinked, struggling to process. "Gone?" Frank nodded heavily. "Someone torched it. Fire department's there now, but there wasn't anything they could save." Jayden felt the room tilt. His lungs tightened as though the smoke had followed Frank into the room. "My house," he whispered. The words tasted wrong, unreal. His house wasn't supposed to burn. It was supposed to be the one place still safe, still standing. His father's tools, their photos, his old notebooks. The shirt he refused to throw away because it still smelled like their last family barbecue. Everything inside those walls held pieces of who he was. And now it was ash. Jayden gripped the blanket until his knuckles whitened. "Was anyone?" "No," Frank said quickly, shaking his head. "No one was inside. Your mom was here, you were here, it was empty." Relief came first, then rage. A wildfire of its own, burning hotter than any flames that consumed his house. He looked Frank dead in the eyes. "They did it." It wasn't a question. Frank didn't pretend otherwise. "Yeah," he said. "Harrington cleanup crew. House fires are a convenient way to erase things." Jayden felt the bitterness like acid. "Evidence?" he murmured. "They think I had something there. They're recovering all angles," Frank replied grimly. "And they think burning your life down will scare you quiet." Jayden's breath came unevenly, each inhale rougher than the last. His mother stirred awake at the sound of voices, eyes still heavy with exhaustion. "Jayden," she whispered, then noticed the tension in the room. "What's happening?" Frank stepped aside to give Jayden space to speak, but Jayden couldn't form the words. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. His mother stood abruptly, fear carving lines across her face. What she demanded. Jayden swallowed hard. "Mom, the house." "It's gone." She froze, her face slackened, not in disbelief but in painful recognition, as if she had always known this day might come. She sank into the chair slowly, covering her mouth with trembling fingers. "They burned it," she whispered. "Just like they burned your father's things at the quarry." Jayden stared at her. It was the first time she'd ever said it so openly. The first time she'd admitted she suspected Thomas Carter hadn't died the way Ridgefall claimed. A long, shuddering silence filled the hospital room as mother and son absorbed the weight of what had been taken. Their home wasn't just shelter, it was memory. It was history, it was everything they had left of him. And now it was gone because Jayden had dared to survive. From the hallway, Sawyer's voice barked orders as more bikers arrived from the outskirts of Ridgefall, drawn in by the fire report like moths to a different kind of flame. The hallway vibrated with heavy boots and low voices. The club knew what the fire meant. It wasn't random. It wasn't accidental. It was a declaration. Sawyer appeared in the doorway moments later, jaw tight, eyes burning with a fury barely contained. "I just got confirmation," he said. "Fire chief says accelerant was used. Professional job. Only one group in this town could pull that off without leaving a trail." Jayden swallowed. "Harrington's." Sawyer nodded. "They're resending a message. And we're going to send one back." Jayden's mom stood, shaking her head desperately. "No more violence, please. I can't lose anyone else." Sawyer softened slightly. "Ma'am, we not starting a war. But we sure as hell not letting them win one without a fight." Jayden felt something crack inside him, not just anger, but grief so raw it stripped away everything soft inside him. His father had died for the truth. His home had burned for the truth, and now he was the last thing they needed to erase. He closed his eyes, letting the reality sink deeper. He was homeless. But worse, he was hunted, and the Harringtons weren't finished. Frank returned to the foot of the bed, running a hand across his beard. "We checked the neighborhood," he said. "Couple of witnesses said they saw a black SUV cruising by a few minutes before the flames went up." Jayden opened his eyes sharply. "Same ones from the mountain," Frank nodded. "Same model. Same tinted windows." Jayden's mom clenched her fists. "They're retreating my son like he's disposable, like we all disposable." Sawyer crossed his arms. "They think burning the house will scare him into silence." Jayden let out a bitter laugh, low and sharp. "They don't know me at all." But the implications were heavy. Without a home, Jayden had nowhere to go once discharged. And the hospital was no longer neutral territory. Harrington influence stretched through Ridgefall like roots beneath every foundation. Any place he tried to hide would be tracked. Any attempt to go to the police would be smothered by Wrecker's connections. Sawyer seemed to read Jayden's thoughts. "You're coming with us when you get out," he said. "We've got a safe location outside town. Private property. Fenced, monitored, off the grid." Jayden met his gaze. Why? The question wasn't accusatory, just incredulous. Why risk so much for him? Sawyer's answer came without hesitation. "Because someone has to stand up to people like the Harringtons. And right now, you're the only one who has something they fear." Jayden tapped the SD card resting beneath his pillow. "This." Sawyer nodded. "Evidence is the only language men like them understand. And you've got enough to tear their empire down." The hospital intercom buzzed suddenly, making everyone jump. A shaken voice announced, "Security, please report to the front entrance. We have unauthorized visitors attempting to enter the building." Sawyer's expression darkened. Frank cursed under his breath. Jayden's mother gripped the edge of the bed. The war was at the door. Again, Jayden drew in a steady breath. His house was gone, his safety was gone, but his resolve stronger than ever. "Let them come," he said, voice steady. "I'm not running." "Not anymore," Sawyer grinned. "Good, because neither are we." Outside the window, smoke from his burning home drifted across the night sky, a dark reminder that the Harrington family had just lit the first match of a battle they could no longer control. Long after midnight, the hospital had settled into that eerie stillness where every sound seemed sharper. The intercom had gone quiet, the hallways dimmed to conserve energy, and even the nurses moved more gently, as if afraid to disturb the fragile balance holding the sixth floor together. Jayden couldn't sleep, not after the fire, not after imagining his father's belongings turning to smoke, not after realizing the Harringtons were closing in from every direction. But exhaustion wasn't the only thing keeping him awake. There was something clawing at the back of his mind, a memory he'd been too overwhelmed to fully see earlier. It came to him now in fragments, his father at the kitchen table late at night, speaking softly to him when he thought Jayden was half asleep. "If anything ever happens," Thomas Carter had whispered, "remember the lake. Remember the old oak. That's where the truth stays safe." Jayden had dismissed it as a father's strange attempt at comfort, but now the words resurfaced with startling clarity. The truth stays safe. Stillwater Lake, the old oak. It wasn't metaphor, it was instruction. His father had hidden something there. Something the Harringtons hadn't found, because if they had, Jayden would already be dead. His breath quickened. Under the blanket, he reached for the SD card again. It was evidence, yes, but not enough to expose everything. Not enough to topple a family with decades of power and corruption buffering them from consequence. But his father's journal, the real journal, not the destroyed copy the quarry claimed had been lost in the accident, that could destroy the Harrington operation from the inside out. Jayden turned toward his mother, who was dozing lightly beside him, her head resting against the chair cushion. He hated the idea of waking her. She had already lost a home, nearly lost a son, and was fighting a war she never asked for. But he also knew her well enough to recognize a simple truth. She wouldn't let him leave the hospital if she knew what he planned. She'd insist it was too dangerous. She'd be right, but danger didn't matter anymore. The truth mattered. And he wasn't going to let the Harringtons bury his father twice. He waited until she breathed deeply in her sleep, then gently pulled his hand free from hers. He winced as he shifted his body, careful to silence the rattle of the bedsheets. The IV tugged at his skin, a stark reminder of how broken he still was. But Jayden gritted his teeth and slowly slid the needle out. The sting made his eyes water. He steadied himself. This wasn't bravery, this was necessity. From the hallway came the low hum of biker voices, their silhouettes passing the glass window occasionally as they guarded the floor. Jayden debated calling out to Frank or Sawyer, but decided against it. If they knew, they'd insist on going with him. But the more people involved, the easier it would be for Harrington goons to follow. The bikers would create too much noise. Jayden needed stealth. He needed someone who knew how to move through Ridgefall unseen, and he knew exactly who that was. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, maneuvered himself into the wheelchair waiting beside it. Every motion burned. Every breath was a war. But he kept going, rolling the chair toward the corner of the room where the shadows pooled thickest. He reached up and gently pushed open the bathroom door, its hinges blessedly silent. Inside, the window was small, meant for ventilation only, but the latch was old. Jayden pushed it upward, wincing as cold air knifed into the room. He wasn't escaping through the hall. That was impossible with 10 armed men outside. But the narrow ledge beneath the window stretched along the building to the fire escape, and most importantly, it wasn't under surveillance. Jayden positioned his chair beneath the window, bracing himself as he lifted his weight upward. His shoulder screamed. His ribs threatened to give out. But he forced himself upward inch by inch until he wriggled through the gap and landed on the ledge with a muted grunt. He clung to the wall, panting, trying not to look down 6 stories. The fire escape was only 5 feet away. 5 feet that felt like 50. He shuffled along the edge, heart pounding so loudly he was certain the entire hospital could hear it. When he reached the rusted ladder, he let out a shaky breath. 1 step closer, 1 step toward the truth. The metal was cold, biting into his palms as he lowered himself onto the fire escape platform. Once there, he reached into the side pocket of his sweatpants and withdrew a small folded slip of paper, one that Brett had shoved into his hand while pretending to help lift him earlier that evening. "Don't trust anyone," Brett had whispered, his face pale. "But if you need an exit, call this number." Jayden didn't trust Brett fully. Not after what he did. Not after what he didn't stop. But Brett wasn't Cole, and guilt had a way of forcing cowards to choose a side. Jayden unfolded the note and dialed the number with trembling fingers. The phone rang twice before Brett answered in a hushed whisper. "Carter, are you okay?" Jayden didn't waste time. "I need to get to Stillwater Lake, now." Brett sucked in a breath. "Stillwater, why?" "Because my father left something there," Jayden said. "And the Harringtons haven't found it yet." There was silence on the line. Then Brett exhaled shakily. "Where are you?" "The hospital fire escape. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Jayden hung up and crouched low as he descended the fire escape inch by painful inch. When he reached the alley behind the hospital, he paused, scanning for Harrington operatives. None in sight. But that didn't mean they weren't watching. Ridgefall was small, but shadows were plentiful. He wheeled himself toward the darkest edge of the building, heart hammering. The night wind carried the faintest smell of smoke from where his house had burned, a cruel reminder of what was already gone. Jayden tightened his jaw. If the Harringtons thought fire could erase the truth, they were about to learn how wrong they were. 10 minutes later, Brett's old pickup truck rolled into the alley, headlights off. Brett jumped out, eyes frantic. "You look terrible," he muttered. Jayden glared. "You helped 'cause this." Brett flinched. "I know, that's why I'm here." He opened the passenger door. "Get in." Jayden maneuvered himself up with Brett's help, swallowing his pride. This wasn't about trust. This wasn't friendship. This was survival. As the truck rumbled toward Stillwater Lake, Jayden stared out the window at the empty road stretching into darkness. Every mile put him farther from the hospital, farther from safety, farther from everything he'd known, but closer finally to the truth his father died protecting. He whispered into the night, "Dad, I'm coming." And the truck kept driving, carrying him into a future he could no longer turn back from. The dirt road leading to Stillwater Lake wound through a dense canopy of pines that loomed like sentries guarding forgotten secrets. Brett's truck rumbled across the uneven ground, its headlights bouncing off the trees as if trying to peel back the darkness. Jayden gripped the dashboard each time the tires dipped into potholes, pain flickering through his ribs, but he didn't tell Brett to slow down. Time mattered more than comfort. Every minute they spent on that road was another minute for Harrington's men to track them, and Jayden knew they would. He stared out the passenger window, watching the moonlit forest blur past, and pictured his father standing beneath the ancient oak, the tree Jayden had played under as a child. Thomas Carter must have known the risks he was taking when he hid evidence there. He must have known someone would need it someday. Jayden hated that the someone had become him, but he also felt a strange fire in his chest. He wasn't just retrieving a box. He was retrieving justice. The lake came into view as the trees thinned, its surface shimmering with a quiet stillness that belied the danger surrounding it. Brett parked beneath a slope where the truck would be hidden from the road, then cut the engine. For a moment they sat in silence, bracing themselves for what came next. Brett swallowed hard. "You sure it's here?" he asked. Jayden nodded. "He told me," not directly, more like he knew something like this would happen. Brett let out a shaky breath. "Man, your dad was braver than any of us." Jayden didn't respond. He didn't have the words. Instead, he opened the door and let the cold night air wash over him as he maneuvered into his wheelchair. The forest was silent, except for the soft lapping of water against the shore and the distant hoot of an owl. But beneath that silence was a pull of gravity drawing Jayden toward the truth left behind. Brett grabbed a flashlight and flicked it on, the beam cutting a narrow path toward the massive oak on the lakeshore. Jayden's breath hitched. Even in the dim light, the tree stood like a monument from another era, twisted and ancient, its roots weaving into the ground like frozen waves. It was exactly as he remembered it, exactly as his father had described it. They approached slowly, their footsteps muffled by damp soil and broken leaves. Jayden rolled close enough to touch the bark, laying his hand against the rough surface. His throat tightened. He could almost feel his father's presence here, could almost hear him humming off key as he worked, could almost picture the quiet strength in his eyes. Brett knelt beside one of the largest roots, brushing away loose soil with trembling fingers. If he hit anything, Brett said, it would be in the root hollow. Jayden pointed there. Check under that ridge. He used to stash my comic books there when Mom thought they were distractions. Brett snorted softly. Guess he graduated from hiding comics to hiding evidence of environmental crimes. Jayden offered a faint smile, but it vanished as Brett's fingers hit metal. Jayden, Brett whispered, eyes widening, there's something here. He dug deeper, both hands now clawing through the dirt, until a dull clank echoed in the stillness. Brett pulled out a small metal box, rusted at the hinges, edges worn, but unmistakably sealed tight against time. Jayden's breath caught. That's it, he whispered, that's really it. They carried the box closer to the tree trunk and set it on a patch of flat earth. Brett hesitated. You want to open it? Jayden reached for the latch with shaking hands. His father's handwriting was etched faintly on the lid, TC, scratched with a pocket knife. He swallowed hard, then flipped the latch. The box creaked open like an exhale from the past. Inside lay a stack of notebooks wrapped in plastic, several folded documents stamped with county seals, 2 as drives, and a handful of photos showing barrels marked with hazard symbols being hauled into areas of the quarry never disclosed to regulators. Jayden lifted one notebook, brushing the dirt from its cover. His father's handwriting filled the first page. Date logs, chemical names, employee testimonies, monitoring reports. And in the margins, written like fragments of confession, were notes that chilled Jayden to the bone. If something happens to me, it won't be an accident. Keep Jayden away from the plant. They know I've seen too much. Jayden felt the air leave his lungs. His father had known the danger, he had anticipated it, and still he chose to fight. Tears blurred Jayden's vision, but he blinked them away fiercely. He had no time to break. Not now, not here. Brett sorted through the papers, face pale. This is huge, he whispered. This isn't just about dumping waste, this is conspiracy, cover-ups, falsified reports, bribes. If this gets out, the whole county will implode. Jayden nodded. That's why they tried to kill me. Why they burned the house. Brett placed a shaky hand on Jayden's shoulder. We gotta get this to someone safe, someone who can publish it. Before Jayden could respond, the sound of snapping branches echoed across the lakeshore. Jayden froze. Brett killed the flashlight instantly, plunging them into darkness. The sound came again, closer, this time heavy, purposeful, not an animal, not random. Jayden's heartbeat thundered in his ears. They were here, he whispered. Brett pulled Jayden's wheelchair backward into the deeper shadow of the oak. I thought we lost them, Brett muttered. Jayden shook his head. The fire, the hospital, the cars. Harrington doesn't stop. Then a beam of light swept across the tree lane. Voices followed. Low, coordinated, tense. Jayden recognized the cadence immediately. Private security, the same men who had tried to breach the hospital. Sweep the area, one of them ordered. They tracked Carter's phone here earlier. He's close. Jayden's stomach twisted. He'd forgotten his phone, cracked in the fall, must have still been pinging a signal. Whether broken or off, its last location led them right to the lake. Brett grabbed the metal box, clutching it to his chest. We can't run, he whispered, not with you hurt. Jayden scanned the lakeshore. The moonlit water stretched behind them. The forest hemmed them in on the other side. The path back to the truck was blocked by the patrol. They were trapped. Unless Jayden's eyes narrowed toward the deepest part of the lake. He pointed. There's a drainage path near the rocks. My dad used to hide fishing gear in there. It connects to the old ranger trail. Brett blinked. We'd have to crawl. Then crawl, Jayden said, gripping the wheels of his chair. But I'm not letting them take this journal. The security lights came closer. Jayden could hear the crunch of boots and the clicking of weapons. Brett hesitated only a second before yanking Jayden's wheelchair toward the rocks. Okay, Brett whispered. Okay, let's do this. Together they slipped into the shadows, dragging the truth Thomas Carter died for, while the net of Harrington men closed in, and somewhere behind them, the giant oak stood silent, not just a tree, but a witness to the moment Ridgefall's darkest secrets finally began clawing their way into the light. The crawl space beneath the rocks was tighter than Jayden remembered, and far darker. Brett dragged the metal evidence box with one hand while using the other to steady Jayden, guiding his wheelchair inch by inch across the slick stones. The narrow drainage tunnel smelled of wet moss and old copper pipes. and each subtle echo of distant footsteps behind them made the space feel even more suffocating. Jayden's breath came in short bursts, a mixture of pain and urgency. The wheezing of his ribs reminded him of every moment he didn't have left. "You good?" Brett whispered, voice trembling. "Keep going," Jayden urged. They were closed. Brett nodded, jaw clenched as he pulled Jayden deeper into the crawl space until a faint glow appeared ahead the break in the rocks that led to the ranger trail. Jayden's heart pounded with relief, but that relief shattered when the forest behind them erupted with shouts. "They found the trail," Brett hissed. "Move." They spilled out onto the ranger path just in time for flashlights to flare in the distance. Silhouettes of Harrington operatives cut across the tree line like wolves closing in on prey. Brett hoisted Jayden into the wheelchair, grabbed the metal box, and sprinted down the trail. Twigs snapped underfoot. The night fractured with shouts. Jayden clung to the chair as the wheels bounced violently against the uneven ground. "This way." Brett gasped, veering off the trail toward a service road he remembered from summer volunteer work. Jayden didn't question him. Brett didn't lie when death was on their heels. They burst through a wall of brush and onto the gravel road just as headlights blinded them. Jayden braced for gunfire, but instead engines roared and familiar figures stepped out: Frank, Big Mike, and 3 more sons of vengeance. Their faces lit with fury and something close to relief. "We've been tracking you since you slipped the hospital," Frank said, breathless. "Kid, if you ever pull that stunt again later," Brett interrupted, doubling over. "They're right behind us." Big Mike swore under his breath, "We gotta move." Frank yanked open the reinforced side cart of his bike, the one designed for hauling supplies but modified with steel bars and shock absorption. "Get him in." Brett lifted Jayden in with surprising strength, then shoved the evidence box into Mike's hands. "Guard this like your soul depends on it." Mike nodded grimly. "After what I've seen tonight, I'm not letting anything happen to this." The gang formed a tight protective formation around Jayden, engines rumbling low like caged thunder. Brett was about to climb into the back of Frank's bike when he suddenly paused. His face had gone stark white. "Oh hell," he whispered. Jayden followed his gaze. At the far end of the road, red and blue flashes pierced the darkness, not police cruisers but armored trucks with heavy floodlights mounted on top. "Is that?" Jayden started. "SWAT," Brett finished, voice cracking. "Not local, these guys are private contractors, Harrington money." Frank stiffened. "They'll wipe everyone out and call it self-defense." Sawyer revved up beside them. "Not tonight, they won't." The bikers closed ranks. Jayden felt the vibrations of their engines through the reinforced metal around him, the growl of defiance building into something primal. But Brett wasn't climbing onto a bike. He was reaching into his jacket. Jayden frowned. "What are you doing?" Brett pulled out a thick, weathered envelope, heavy, like it carried more than papers. "This," he said, thrusting it into Jayden's lap, "is everything I have left to make this right." Jayden stared at him, confused. Brett stepped closer, eyes intense. "I stole it from my uncle's desk. He works for Harrington's legal team, handles disposals. He keeps files in case he ever needs leverage. I wasn't supposed to see them, but I did." Jayden opened the envelope. Inside were printed logs, dates, times, GPS coordinates detailing illegal chemical dumping zones across Ridgefall County. Payments disguised as community relief funds, photos of dead wildlife near Clearbend River, and worst of all, a typed memo with signatures. One line punched Jayden in the chest: "Neutralize Thomas Carter before he escalates." Brett swallowed hard. "I didn't know. I knew they were bad, but I didn't know they straight up greenlit." He trailed off, voice breaking. Jayden looked at him. Truly looked at him. Brett Maddox, who once laughed behind Cole Harrington like a shadow, was now shaking, terrified not of being caught helping Jayden, but of living one more day knowing he stayed silent while another man died. "Why are you giving this to me?" Jayden asked quietly. Brett wiped his face with the back of his hand. "Because I'm done. I'm done being his puppet. I'm done being afraid, and because if SWAT gets here, they'll kill us all. They'll say we attacked them. Harrington will bury it." Frank shouted from the front, "Move now." The SWAT lights grew brighter, engines roaring, gravel spitting under thick tires. Brett looked at Jayden one last time. "Take it," he whispered. "Tell the world the truth. Tell them what my family did." Jayden grabbed his arm. "Come with us." Brett shook his head. "I'll hold them off. Someone needs to delay them. Someone they aren't authorized to kill yet." Jayden felt ice slide down his spine. Brett done, but Brett stepped back, eyes steady, face resolute in a way Jayden had never seen. "I owe your father," he said. "And I owe you." Then he turned and sprinted toward the incoming armored trucks, waving his arms like a man deranged.
"Hey! Over here!"
he shouted. "You want Carter? Come through me first." SWAT vehicles screeched to a halt, floodlights surged to life.
"Chaos cracked open, go!"
Brett screamed over his shoulder. Frank slammed the side cart door shut. The bikers roared into motion as the first flashbang detonated behind them, lighting the road in a violent burst of white. Jayden flinched hard in his throat. Brett's silhouette disappeared behind a wall of blinding light, shouting words Jayden couldn't hear but felt in his bones. Sacrifice, defiance, anger, redemption. The sons of vengeance swarmed the road, their engines drowned only by the thunder of SWAT boots hitting the gravel. Jayden clutched the envelope to his chest. The evidence inside was heavy not just with paper, but with the cost of every life the Harringtons had destroyed. As the bikers sped deeper into the forest, weaving through trees with practiced skill, Jayden felt the truth burning inside him hotter than any fire that had taken his home. Brett Maddox had turned, and whether he lived through the night or not, he had given Jayden the final weapon he needed. Harrington had unleashed a war, but Jayden wasn't running anymore. He was fighting. And the world would hear the truth, even if he had to bleed it into the ground to make them listen. The forest blurred past in streaks of black and silver as the sons of vengeance tore down the fire road, engines screaming in unison. Jayden clutched the envelope and the metal box against his chest, holding them as tightly as he held the last pieces of his father's legacy. Every jolt of the bike's sidecar sent pain through his ribs, but he endured it, gripping the steel frame until his fingers ached. Behind them, flashes of SWAT lights burst through the trees like lightning, illuminating the smoke drifting from flashbangs and sparks where bullets skimmed stones. Jayden heard Sawyer's voice over the roar of engines. We need to split scatter formation. Instantly, the group divided, peeling off into different paths through the forest. Frank stayed with Jayden, carving a road only someone who knew Ridgefall's hidden trails could navigate. Big Mike flanked them like a living wall of metal, blocking any pursuit. The mission was no longer escape, it was exposure. Jayden had one chance to release the truth before Harrington silenced him for good. And there was only one place in Ridgefall where he could do it: Kerrville 92.7, the old local radio station that broadcast county-wide and still ran late-night talk segments during emergencies. If Jayden could get inside and override the system, even for just a few minutes, he could flood the airwaves with evidence. Harrington couldn't race a broadcast heard by thousands. Frank slid the bike to a halt behind the abandoned lumber mill less than a mile from the station. This is as close as we get, he said. Roads too exposed up ahead. Jayden nodded. We go on foot. Kid, Frank growled, you can barely breathe. Jayden tightened his grip on the metal box. Then help me breathe long enough to finish this. Sawyer arrived seconds later, sweat streaking through the dirt on his face. SWAT's got drones up, he warned. We don't have time to be careful. Jayden met his eyes. Then we won't be. Frank and Mike lifted Jayden from the sidecar and set him back in the wheelchair. They pushed him across the weeds toward the station's rear door, moving fast but low. Jayden looked over his shoulder once, hoping for a glimpse of Brett, but the forest behind them roared with distant combat flashlights, shouts, smoke. Brett was either alive or gone. Jayden couldn't afford to dwell on it now. The truth needed him breathing. The door to Kerrville was locked, rust creeping around the hinges. Mike didn't hesitate. He kicked it once, hard, and the latch snapped. They slipped inside, into a narrow hallway lined with old posters from the town's forgotten glory days. The air smelled like dust and stale coffee. Sawyer scanned the rooms, hand resting on the grip of his knife. Clear, he whispered. Studios at the end. Jayden rolled toward the control booth, heart pounding. He'd listened to this station his whole life: road closure warnings, wildfire alerts, county fair ads. Never once had he imagined he'd be the one behind the microphone. But tonight, Ridgefall needed to hear the voice of someone they couldn't ignore. Frank helped Jayden into the swivel chair in front of the console. Dozens of switches, faders, and blinking lights waited for him like a cockpit built for truth. Can you run it? Frank asked. Jayden nodded slowly. My dad brought me here once. He said every town needed a place where truth couldn't hide. Frank rested a hand on Jayden's shoulder, make him proud. Outside, the rumble of approaching engines grew louder. Harrington's men were closing in. Jayden powered up the broadcasting system. Static crackled through the speakers, filling the booth like electricity. His hands trembled as he slid in the first US drive, the one from the metal box. The screen loaded fileless chemical reports, unedited logs, time-stamped videos, enough evidence to bury the Harrington empire 10 times over. Jayden pressed a button, and the station switched from scheduled programming to live override. Music abruptly cut off across Ridgefall. Silence followed. Then Jayden leaned toward the microphone. My name is Jayden Carter, he said. His voice shook not with fear but with weight. And this town has been lied to. Mike peeked through the blinds. Keep talking, kid. They're almost here. Jayden steadied himself and continued. Tonight I almost died, not by accident, not by misfortune. I was pushed off Eagle Summit by Cole Harrington because I heard the truth about what his family did to my father, Thomas Carter. Frank dropped the first stack of documents onto the scanner. Jayden hit broadcast. Papers rustled over the airwaves as they streamed live. My father didn't die in a quarry accident. He was killed because he discovered illegal dumping, bribery, and assault tied directly to Harrington Quarry. Static surged briefly, then audio clips filled the broadcast. Cole bragging about the cover-up, threatening him. Gasps echoed from the nurses' station radios across Ridgefall Memorial. Truckers pulled over on the highway to listen. Families at dinner tables froze. Deputies at the sheriff's office looked up sharply. Ridgefall wasn't hearing rumors, they were hearing confessions. Jayden continued, voice growing stronger. These journals belong to my father. They detail everything, dates, chemicals, names. The evidence Harrington burned my house down trying to destroy. Frank fed more pages into the scanner, barrels, maps, payment logs. The truth poured out like floodwater finally breaking a dam. If something happens to me, Jayden said into the microphone, then you'll know exactly who is responsible. And you'll know why. Outside, tires screeched, door slammed, a voice shouted, "Breach!
Sawyer's time's up."
Jayden hit the final switch broadcast lock. Even if the power dropped now, the system would keep transmitting until it fully cycled. The Harringtons couldn't shut it off without breaking every line in the building. Heavy boots thundered down the hallway. Sawyer braced at the doorway, knife drawn. "Finish it!" Jayden leaned into the mic one last time. "My father died for the truth. Tonight it lives again." And Ridgefall, his voice cracked with emotion he no longer tried to hide. "This is your fight now." The door exploded inward as Harrington operatives stormed the booth. Sawyer tackled the first one. Frank flipped the table. Mike bodily blocked Jayden from a taser hit, but the broadcast was already out. Phones vibrated across Ridgefall. Neighbors called neighbors. Deputies called reporters. People poured into the streets, gathering outside the sheriff's office, the courthouse, the quarry. The truth had ignited the town like dry timber meeting flame. As operatives grabbed Jayden's arms and dragged him from the booth, he heard the distant roar of something more powerful than sirens' voices. Hundreds of them, a crowd forming a town waking up, a movement his father had died hoping for. Jayden smiled through the pain, not because he was safe, he wasn't, but because the Harringtons had finally lost the one weapon they relied on most, control. And no amount of money, muscle, or silence could put out a fire that had already reached the hearts of thousands. Ridgefall had heard the truth, and the truth wasn't going back into the dark ever again. In a town like Ridgefall, where power flowed in one direction and fear trickled through every crack, Jayden Carter's story reveals the truth about courage. It is never born in comfort. It rises in the moments when silence could save you but speaking could save someone else. Jayden was never meant to be a hero. He was a boy who simply refused to die quietly. His story teaches us that real bravery is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act even when every force around you is engineered to crush you. When he uncovered the reason behind his father's death, he could have folded under the weight of it. He could have accepted the lies, the manipulation, the rewritten histories designed to protect the powerful. Instead, he chose truth over safety, even as the world he knew was burned down piece by piece. His courage didn't roar. It held on by fingertips on the edge of a cliff and whispered, "Not today." And that whisper was enough to shake an entire empire. Another lesson hidden inside Jayden's journey is the reminder that evil doesn't always appear wearing villainy on its face. Sometimes it looks like a respected doctor, a successful businessman, a sheriff with a polished badge. Corruption in Ridgefall thrived not because its citizens were blind, but because they were tired of fighting systems that never listened. Tired of losing jobs if they spoke, tired of burying loved ones whose stories were rewritten to protect the rich. This story shows how dangerous it is when power goes unchecked. The Harrington family wasn't powerful because they were clever, but because no one dared challenge the myth that they were untouchable. Jayden's father tried and he paid the price. Jayden tried and they tried to make him pay the same. But the lesson here is that power built on fear is brittle. It cracks the moment someone exposes it to the light. The Harringtons didn't fear the bikers or even the law, they feared the truth. Because the truth has no owner, no price tag, no leash. It belongs to everyone willing to hear it. And once Jayden released it, they no longer controlled the story. A single voice, amplified across radio waves, became louder than decades of intimidation. The story also reveals that allies are not always born from the places we expect. Jayden's greatest protectors were not the police, the teachers, or the institutions designed to keep him safe. They were the ones society often judged the harshest, the sons of vengeance. A group with hard edges, rough histories, and a reputation that made people cross the street at their approach. Yet these men recognized injustice when they saw it. They didn't need permission to act, nor validation to do what was right. They simply stood between a boy and the people trying to erase him. Through them, the story teaches us that goodness is not defined by appearance, background, or social reputation. It is defined by choice. It is defined by who steps forward when doing so has a cost. And in Ridgefall, The ones who looked most dangerous were the ones who carried the most humanity. They remind us that labels are fragile things, poor measures of character that often hide the deepest truths about people. Brett's role in the story offers another powerful lesson. Redemption is messy, painful, and rarely straightforward. He was complicit in the bullying, silence, and cruelty that almost killed Jayden. Yet he was also the only one close enough to the darkness to expose its inner workings. His guilt forced him to choose between loyalty to a corrupt legacy and loyalty to conscience. Redemption didn't erase what he had done. It didn't make him a hero, but it did make him human. His choice to help Jayden, to hand over the documents that condemned his own family, shows that change is possible even for those who start on the wrong side of the line. His courage came not from strength but from vulnerability. He teaches us that people are not defined solely by their worst moments, but by their willingness to confront them. In the end, Brett stood unarmed between a boy and an army, not because he expected to survive, but because he needed to make something right before it swallowed him whole. Finally, Jayden's broadcast the moment his voice filled every home, every diner. Every patrol car in Ridgefall delivers the core lesson of the story: truth is only powerless when kept in the dark. The Harringtons controlled the police, the courts, the economy, and the narrative, but they could not control what happened when a single boy refused to stay silent. They couldn't control the townspeople once they heard the truth delivered in Jayden's trembling, determined voice. A community that had been tired, broken, and afraid for years suddenly remembered its strength when the lies were stripped away. Truth didn't free Jayden alone, it freed a town trapped under the weight of one family's sins. When people finally saw the whole picture, they acted, they stood, they refused to be intimidated anymore. And that is the final message. Truth doesn't just expose corruption, it mobilizes justice. It awakens courage in those who forgot they had it. It binds communities together in ways fear never can. Jayden's story is not a tale of a boy defeating a powerful family. It is the story of what happens when a light, however small, shines into the darkest corner of a broken system. It is about how one voice amplified at the right moment can fracture decades of silence. It is about lost resilience and the quiet power of refusing to disappear. The lesson is simple yet profound: when people stand up, even those who seem invincible can fall. If you found this content helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of my latest videos. If you have any ideas or topics you'd like me to cover, leave a comment below. I always read all your comments.